As a joke, a poor cowboy was given a paralyzed woman, but she became his pride. The town of Red Hollow was small, dusty, and full of loud men who believed strength was the only thing that mattered. Every evening, after a long day under the burning sun, cowboys gathered at the local saloon. They laughed, drank, and told stories about bravery and fights. In that crowd, there was one man who never quite fit in. His name was Elias Boone. Elias was a poor cowboy. His clothes were always clean but worn out. His boots had cracks, and his hat had lost its shape long ago. He worked harder than most men in town, yet he earned less. He didn't fight, didn't brag, and didn't try to prove himself. Because of this, many people thought he was weak. But Elias was not weak, he was simply kind. That night, the saloon was louder than usual. A group of cowboys sat around a table, laughing loudly. They had been drinking for hours, and their jokes were becoming meaner. "Look at Elias," one of them said, pointing toward him. "Man can't even stand up for himself." Another cowboy laughed. "He ain't a real cowboy, more like a quiet shadow." Elias stood near the counter, holding a glass of water. He heard them, but he didn't react. He never did. He simply kept to himself. That only made them laugh more. "Let's give him something to prove himself," a tall man named Briggs said with a smirk. "Something he can't run away from." The others leaned closer, curious. "What do you mean?" one asked. Briggs took a slow drink, then said, "You all know about that woman. The one left behind on the edge of town?" The room grew quieter for a moment. People knew who he meant. Her name was Clara Whitmore. Clara had once come from a respected family, but after a terrible accident, she had lost the ability to walk. Over time, her family lost money, and one by one, they left her behind. Now she lived in a small, broken house outside Red Hollow, with no one to care for her. Most people avoided her, not because she was unkind, but because they didn't want the burden. Briggs smiled cruelly. "Let's give her to Elias." The men laughed. "You're serious?" someone said. "Why not?" Briggs replied. "He wants to be seen as a good man, right? Let him prove it." The idea spread quickly. To them, it was just another joke. "Hey, Elias!" Briggs called out loudly. Elias turned slowly. "Yes?" Briggs leaned back in his chair. "We got a gift for you." Elias frowned slightly. "A gift?" "Yeah," another man added with a grin. "A real responsibility, something important." Elias stepped closer, unsure. "What is it?" Briggs looked straight at him. "Clara Whitmore. She needs someone to take care of her. We think you're perfect." The table burst into laughter. Elias stood still. For a moment, he didn't speak. The men expected him to refuse. They expected him to get angry or walk away, but Elias didn't do either. Instead, he asked quietly, "She has no one?" The laughter slowed. "No one," Briggs said, still smiling. Elias looked down at the floor. His mind was heavy with thoughts. He barely had enough for himself. His cabin was small, his money was low, and his life was already hard. Taking care of another person, especially someone who could not walk, would change everything. But still, he could not ignore it. After a long silence, Elias looked back up. "I'll take her," he said. The room went silent. For a second, no one laughed. "You... what?" Briggs asked, confused. "I'll take her," Elias repeated. "If she needs help, I'll help." Now the laughter returned, but it sounded different this time. Louder, almost shocked. "You don't even know what you're saying," one man said. "You can't even take care of yourself," another added. But Elias didn't argue. He simply nodded once. "Tell me where she is." Briggs leaned forward, studying him. "You're serious?" Elias gave a small, calm answer. "Yes." The men shook their heads, still laughing, but now there was something else in their eyes. Surprise. Later that night, Elias walked alone toward the edge of town. The wind was cold, and the road was quiet. Every step felt heavier than the last. He didn't know what he would find. He didn't know how he would manage, but he kept walking. Soon, he reached a small, broken house. The door was old, and one window was cracked. A faint light glowed inside. Elias stood there for a moment, then gently knocked. There was silence. Then, after a few seconds, a soft voice came from inside. "Who is it?" Elias hesitated, then spoke. "My name is Elias Boone," he said. I came to help." There was a long pause. When the door slowly opened, Elias saw her for the first time. Clara sat in a wooden chair, wrapped in a thin blanket. Her face looked tired, but her eyes were sharp and watchful. She didn't look weak, just alone. She studied him carefully. Help? She said softly. Why? Elias didn't have a perfect answer, but he spoke honestly. Because you shouldn't be alone. Clara looked at him for a long moment, unsure what to believe. Outside, the wind moved through the empty land. Inside, something quiet and unexpected had just begun. The night was cold, and the small house felt even colder. Elias stood near the door, unsure of what to say next. Clara still watched him with careful eyes, as if she was trying to understand his true reason for coming. People don't just come to help, she said quietly. Elias nodded a little. I know. Then why are you here? She asked again. Elias looked around the broken room. The table was old, the floor was dusty, and there was almost nothing inside the house. It felt empty, just like a place forgotten by the world. They told me about you, Elias said slowly, that you had no one. Clara gave a small, bitter smile. And they sent you as a joke, didn't they? Elias did not answer right away. That silence was enough. Clara looked away. I thought so. For a moment, the room felt heavy again. But Elias didn't leave. Instead, he stepped inside and gently closed the door behind him. I don't think it's a joke, he said. Clara looked back at him, surprised. Elias spoke simply. You need help. I can try. Clara studied his face. He didn't look proud or strong like the other men in town, but there was something steady in him, something honest. After a long pause, she sighed softly. Trying is not easy. I know, Elias replied. Another silence filled the room, but this one felt different. Less cold, less empty. Finally, Clara said, All right, you can stay for tonight. Elias gave a small nod. Thank you. The next morning came early. Sunlight entered through the cracked window, lighting up the dusty room. Elias had barely slept. He spent most of the night thinking about what he had done. He had no plan. But he knew one thing. He could not walk away now. Clara was already awake when he turned around. She sat quietly, watching him. You don't have to stay, she said. Elias shook his head. I said I would help. Clara looked down at her hands. Most people say things they don't mean. I try not to, Elias replied. Those simple words made Clara pause. The first few days were not easy. Elias did not know how to care for someone like Clara. Every small task felt difficult. Moving her chair, preparing food, cleaning the house, it all took time, and he made many mistakes. Once he dropped a cup of water. Another time, he cooked the food too much, and it tasted bad. I'm sorry, Elias said again and again. Clara at first said very little. She had seen people fail before. She expected him to leave soon, but Elias didn't leave. Each day, he tried again. Slowly, things began to change. Elias started fixing the house. He repaired the broken window with wooden boards. He cleaned the floor and moved things to make space easier for Clara. I don't need all this, Clara said one day. Elias smiled lightly. Maybe not, but it helps. Clara didn't argue after that. She began to notice something. Elias never complained. Even when he was tired, even when things went wrong, he stayed calm. He spoke kindly, and he listened when she talked. One afternoon, while Elias was working outside, Clara called out, What are you doing? Fixing the fence, Elias answered. Why? She asked. No one comes here. Elias looked at the land around the house. Maybe not now, but someday someone might. Clara was quiet for a moment. Or maybe, Elias added softly, it just makes the place feel more like a home. That word stayed in Clara's mind. Home. She hadn't felt that in a long time. As days turned into weeks, Clara began to change too. At first, she barely spoke, but slowly, she started asking questions. Where are you from? She asked one evening. Nowhere special, Elias replied. Just moved from place to place. Why? She asked. Elias thought for a moment. Never found a reason to stay. Clara looked at him carefully. And now? Elias didn't answer right away. Then he said quietly, Maybe I have one. Clara looked away, but a small smile appeared on her face. They began to share small moments. Elias would tell simple stories about the land, about horses, about long rides under the open sky. Clara would listen closely, sometimes laughing softly at his plain way of speaking. In return, Clara shared her thoughts. She was smart and observant. She noticed things Elias missed. You should not sell your tools so quickly, she told him once. Fix them first. They will be worth more. Elias followed her advice, and she was right. That was the first time he realized Clara was not someone to be pitied. She was strong in her own way. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Elias sat outside the house. Clara was near the door, watching the sky. It's beautiful, she said softly. Elias nodded. Yes. Clara looked at him. You didn't leave. Elias shook his head. No. Why? She asked again. Elias looked at the open land, then back at her. Because you matter, he said simply. Clara didn't speak after that, but her eyes softened. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel forgotten. And Elias no longer felt like a man with nothing. Something small but real was growing between them. Not from jokes, not from pity, but from patience and quiet care. The wind in Red Hollow began to change as the season slowly moved forward. The dry heat softened and cooler air started to pass through the land. Around Elias's small home, things were no longer broken and silent like before. The fence stood straight now. The roof no longer leaked. The ground outside had been cleared and a small garden had started to grow. It wasn't much, but it was alive. Inside the house, Clara sat near the window, watching Elias as he worked outside. She noticed everything. The way he fixed things carefully, the way he stopped to think before making decisions, and the way he never rushed, even when life was hard. Elias, she called out. He turned. Yes? You planted those too close, she said, pointing toward the small garden. Elias looked confused. Too close? They won't grow well like that, Clara explained. They need space. Elias walked closer, studying the plants. You're sure? Clara gave a small nod. I used to help my father with this. Elias didn't question her again. He simply smiled a little and began moving the plants. You're right, he said after a while. Clara watched quietly, a soft pride in her eyes. Life was still not easy. Elias worked long hours, sometimes leaving early in the morning and returning late in the evening. He took small jobs from nearby ranches, fixing fences, carrying supplies, and doing whatever he could to earn money. But something had changed. Before, he worked just to survive. Now, he worked with purpose. Each coin he earned meant better food, stronger tools, and a more comfortable life for both of them. One day, Elias returned from town with a few wooden pieces and some old wheels. Clara looked at them curiously. What is that? I'm not sure yet, Elias said with a small smile. For the next few days he worked on something behind the house. He measured carefully, cut wood slowly, and adjusted every small detail. Clara watched him from the window, wondering what he was building. Finally, one afternoon, Elias pushed his creation forward. It was a simple wooden chair, but stronger, smoother, and easier to move than the one Clara had been using. I made this for you, Elias said. Clara looked at it surprised. You made this? Elias nodded. It's not perfect, but it might help. For a moment, Clara didn't move. Then she slowly reached out and touched the wood. It was smooth, carefully shaped, made with effort. Help me try it, she said quietly. Elias gently assisted her into the new chair. It moved more easily, and for the first time, Clara could turn and adjust her position without much effort. A small smile appeared on her face. It's good, she said. Elias's shoulders relaxed. I'm glad. That moment was small, but important. Word about Elias began to spread in town. At first, people didn't believe it. That quiet cowboy? One man said. Taking care of someone else? No way. But slowly, people started to notice. They saw Elias working harder than before. They saw him buying supplies, fixing tools, and staying focused. And sometimes, they saw Clara too, sitting outside, watching the world with calm, thoughtful eyes. She looks different, a woman in town said one day. Stronger. The laughter that once followed Elias began to fade. Now, people spoke with curiosity. One afternoon, Elias went into town to sell some repaired tools. As he walked through the street, a few men noticed him. Among them was Briggs. Well, look who's here, Briggs said with a smirk. Elias stopped but didn't react. You still playing hero? Briggs continued. Taking care of that woman? Elias answered calmly. Her name is Clara. Briggs raised an eyebrow. So, you stayed? Yes, Elias said simply. The other men looked at each other. They expected weakness, but Elias didn't look weak anymore. He stood steady, his voice calm, his eyes clear. Briggs laughed lightly, but it didn't sound as strong as before. And what did you get from it? Elias thought for a moment. Then he said, a reason. The men had no quick answer for that. Elias turned and walked away. For the first time, no one laughed behind him. Back at the house, Clara was waiting. You were gone longer today, she said. Elias placed the coins on the table. Work took time. Clara looked at the coins. You're earning more now. Elias nodded. Your advice helped. Clara gave a small smile. You listen well. Elias sat down near the door. You see things I don't. Clara looked out at the land. I had a lot of time to think before you came. There was no sadness in her voice this time, only quiet honesty. As days passed, their bond grew stronger. They worked together in their own ways. Elias used his hands, Clara used her mind, and together they built something neither of them expected. One evening, as the sun slowly disappeared behind the hills, Clara spoke softly. Do you ever regret it? She asked. Regret what? Elias said. Coming here, staying. Elias looked at her. Then he looked around the home, the repaired walls, the small garden, the quiet peace that now lived in that place. No, he said. Clara watched him closely. Not even once? Elias shook his head. Not even once. Clara looked down, her expression thoughtful. Then, very quietly, she said, Good. Because deep inside, she had begun to feel something she thought was lost forever. Not just safety, not just comfort, but worth. And Elias, without realizing it, had found strength not in power, but in care. Something the town was only just beginning to understand. The morning sun rose gently over Red Hollow, casting warm light across the land. The small house that once looked forgotten now stood strong and quiet, surrounded by signs of care and effort. The garden had grown fuller, the fence stood firm, and the place no longer felt empty. Inside, Clara sat near the window, her hands resting calmly on her lap. She looked outside as Elias worked, fixing a loose wooden board near the fence. Things were different now. Not just around the house, but inside them. One afternoon, something unexpected happened. A group of men rode toward Elias's home. Dust followed their horses, and their voices carried through the air. Clara noticed them first. Elias, she called out, her voice steady. Elias turned and looked. His eyes narrowed slightly as he recognized the riders. Briggs was among them. Elias walked slowly toward the front of the house, standing calmly as the men approached. They stopped a few steps away, looking around with surprise. This place, one man muttered. It's changed. Briggs stepped forward, scanning the house, the garden, and then Clara. Well, he said with a half smile. This ain't what I expected. Elias didn't respond right away. What do you want? Briggs crossed his arms. We came to see how the joke turned out. There was a brief silence. Elias stood still. It wasn't a joke. The men exchanged glances. Briggs chuckled lightly, but it didn't carry the same confidence as before. Looks like you took it real serious. Elias nodded once. I did. Clara watched quietly from where she sat. Her eyes were calm, but sharp. Briggs stepped a little closer. So tell me, Elias, was it worth it? Elias looked around his home again. The repaired walls, the growing plants, the quiet peace. Then he looked at Clara. Yes, he said simply. The answer was short, but strong. The men stayed silent for a moment. Then one of them spoke, softer this time. You did all this on your own? Elias shook his head. Not alone. He turned slightly toward Clara. She helped, he said. All eyes moved to Clara. For the first time, the men really looked at her, not as a burden, not as someone weak, but as a person. Clara met their gaze without fear. I only shared what I know, she said calmly. Briggs frowned slightly, as if unsure what to say next. This was not what he expected. He had come to see failure. Instead, he saw something steady, something real. After a few moments, Briggs gave a small nod. Well, he said, you proved something, I guess. Elias didn't answer. Briggs turned his horse around. Come on, he told the others. As they began to leave, one man looked back and said quietly, You did good, Elias. Elias watched them ride away. There was no laughter this time, only silence, and something new. Respect. That evening, the sky turned orange and gold as the sun slowly set. Elias sat outside on a wooden step, resting after a long day. Clara sat nearby, facing the open land. They came to see a joke, Clara said softly. Elias nodded. Yes. And they left differently, she added. Elias gave a small smile. People change. Clara looked at him. You change too. Elias thought about that. Before, he had lived without direction. Each day was the same, and nothing felt important. Now, everything felt different. I didn't change alone, he said. Clara didn't reply, but her expression softened. Days passed, and word continued to spread through Red Hollow. People no longer spoke about Elias with laughter. Instead, they spoke about his work, his effort, and the way he cared for Clara. Some even came to visit. A woman from town brought fresh bread one day. A man offered better paying work. Little by little, the world that once ignored them began to open. One afternoon, Clara sat outside as a young boy from town approached carefully. Miss Clara? He said. Clara looked at him. Yes? My father said you're very smart. The boy said shyly. Can you help me with something? Clara smiled gently. Of course. Elias watched from a distance as Clara spoke with the boy, explaining things patiently. He felt something warm in his chest. Pride. Not the loud kind that men in town used to show, but a quiet, deep pride. Later that night, as the stars filled the sky, Clara spoke again. Elias, she said. Yes, he replied. You didn't just help me, she said slowly. Elias looked at her, confused. What do you mean? Clara took a breath. You gave me a place again, a voice, a reason to be seen. Elias didn't speak for a moment. Then he said quietly, You gave me the same. Clara's eyes softened. The wind moved gently through the land, carrying the quiet sounds of the night. The house stood strong, not because it was big or rich, but because it was built with care. What started as a cruel joke had become something far greater. Elias was no longer just a poor cowboy, and Clara was no longer someone left behind. Together, they had built something that could not be laughed at, something real, something lasting. And in that quiet, simple life, they found something many never do, a true sense of pride.